Now that we've gone through plenty of engaging episodes that thoughtfully explore both Batman and his rogues gallery, it's way past time we take a good hard look at Robin, and just how integral he is to the series. Robin's Reckoning is a perfect introduction to the character for just about anyone, especially if you believe that Robin's role in Batman's universe is simply to be the jokey sidekick. Alternatively, this is also the perfect introduction to Dick Grayson, an important distinction to make because other characters have taken on the Robin persona, both in this series and of course in the comics. Each one has a distinct personality and working relationship with Batman, but Dick Grayson is the first and set the standard for what the Robin identity entails, which is why I think most Batman media chooses him over the other Robins that have been introduced in the comics, like in Batman Forever or The Batman. Even Batman projects that use one of the other Robins from the comics at least include Dick as Nightwing and highlight that he was the first in the Robin legacy, such as in Arkham City or Under the Red Hood. This episode simultaneously tells viewers why Batman and Robin make a team good enough to be heralded as a dynamic duo, but also sets up the tension and slightly different worldviews between these two characters that culminates into Dick eventually becoming Nightwing. I won't focus too much on that latter aspect of Robin's Reckoning because it merely opens up the possibility for an eventual rift, and because the New Adventures episode Old Wounds is where this concept becomes truly concrete. That being said, Batman and Robin are at odds for a majority of this story, so that will be a focus of this review, but purely in the context of this two-parter and not for later episodes. I'll say right off that I thought Part 1 is the superior of the two because most of the story's meat is there, though obviously not all of it, and because it contains some of the most stunning animation this series ever delivered, but more on that later. Part 1 begins by doing a great job of introducing viewers to the status quo of Batman and Robin fighting crime together in a fun action sequence, but quickly asserts that this will be a deeper examination of their relationship when Batman dismisses Robin from interrogating a thug, and they have their first real argument thus far in the series. It's in the scene where Batman and Robin argue in the Batcave that it's clear the producers of the show made a very smart move in making Dick college age. Not only does it provide a reasonable explanation for why he isn't hanging around with Batman all the time, it also means Robin can be put in more thematically mature situations, as Paul Dini says on the Robin featurette in the second box set. I like that Robin apologizes for jumping the gun during the interrogation because it shows that he isn't the rebellious teen sidekick that can be annoyingly portrayed in a lesser series. When Robin does get angry at Batman, it's entirely justified on his part because Batman is keeping secrets and is not being on the level as would befit a partner that's been working with him for years now. On the other hand, Batman genuinely does have Robin's best interests at heart, as Alfred says, and wants to protect him from more pain. Batman broke up the interrogation because the thug gave up the name of an alias Tony Zuko goes by, the man who murdered Dick's parents. The story becomes one of the most personal the show ever attempted and provides a great excuse to go back to Robin's origin and expand it to convey just how important Bruce is to Dick, and vice versa. The first flashback introduces viewers to Dick's circus background, a setting that's very whimsical and old-fashioned, which has never posed a problem for Batman the Animated Series due to its 30s aesthetic, making the origin feel much more natural than in a modernized Batman universe like the Dark Knight movies. This flashback is very effective at putting the audience in the perspective of young Dick Grayson, thus getting much of the story's legwork done. For instance, we don't really get to know Dick's parents, but that doesn't matter because we know just how dear they are to Dick, and the tragedy of their death is still felt. Bruce Timm in the commentary for Part 1 talks about how they were forced to be creative in how they framed the scene because the censors wouldn't allow them to show Dick's parents falling to their death. How their death is represented by a snapped rope swinging side to side is absolutely brilliant, and the shots of their trapeze performance that leads up to their fall are almost operatic, especially in the shots where you mostly see their silhouettes. The bleakness of Dick's new stage in life after leaving home is best conveyed visually as Dick sits on what seems like the hardest bed on Earth in the middle of a giant and dark room in Wayne Manor. Bruce says that it was his old room, and if he really slept in such a creepy place every night, it's really no wonder he became Batman. Speaking of Batman, the second flashback is from his perspective and beautifully examines how his own background allows him to relate to this orphaned boy. Despite the first flashback centering on the death of Dick's parents, the scene where Bruce talks to Dick about how the hurt of losing a loved one never really goes away is easily the most emotional moment in the story and probably the entire series. Both this moment and when Alfred tells Bruce that he needed a friend after his parents died demonstrates the profound effect Bruce has on Dick. The reason Dick grows to have a more positive outlook on life is because Bruce was willing to put aside the pursuit of vengeance and be there for this boy. Similar to the vow he made on his parents' grave, he promises Dick that even though the pain will always be there, it will get better for him. Bruce is a damaged figure, but he's aware that he went down a darker path, and he wants to prevent others, especially the youths in Gotham, to go through the same experience. The fact that Alfred is the one that brings this to Bruce's attention shows that he is invaluable as a voice of reason, and perhaps one can even extrapolate that he regrets not being able to veer Bruce away from his vengeful emotions as a child and lead him to a more well-adjusted persona. Bruce successfully nurturing Dick into a psychologically healthy individual feeds into why he feels so betrayed when he discovers Bruce's deception. He feels that this is really the first time that Bruce, who in many ways has become a father figure, has let him down, prompting Dick's first, but definitely not last, show of rebellion. Before moving on, I'd like to mention that Part 1 has quite a lot of Batman interrogation moments for a single episode, and they're all awesome. First is the "It's you, me, and 20 stories", then is the awesome knuckle crack, and finally, "You wouldn't want to see me grumpy". Nice bit of continuity, by the way, bringing back Stromwell from It's Never Too Late, and making him Tony Zuko's uncle. In rewatching Part 2, I discovered that it's better than I remembered from my last viewing, but is still definitely the weaker of the two. This episode slows down when the young Dick goes out in search of Zuko on his own and saves this woman who may or may not be a prostitute. After all, this is a kids' show. That's not to say this section doesn't have a logical purpose within the story. This helps the audience buy just how important it is for him to get Zuko, though him getting angry at Batman for saving him and letting Zuko go does this just fine too, and that he is resourceful enough to receive training under Batman's wing, no pun intended. My only problem here is that this goes on long enough to feel disjointed from the strong emotional core that drives the rest of the scenes. Because Part 2 has much more action than its predecessor, it is limited to two key scenes for Robin's character progression. The first is when Batman takes Dick to the Batcave, which serves to drive home how Bruce chooses to guide Dick onto a lighter path. It's very telling that Bruce chooses to reveal his identity after Dick has let his desire for vengeance cloud his thinking and attack Zuko. Bruce figures that training Dick will give him the discipline to work through any darker emotions and the opportunity to uphold justice, thus making Dick a more optimistic youth than Bruce ever was. The second scene is when Robin finally confronts Zuko in the present day and has to finally choose between that almost primal darkness born out of tragedy and the curiously brighter influence that Batman has had on him. I say curiously brighter because it's difficult to imagine a situation where Batman, of all people, is the less darker figure, which absolutely works in this context. What's truly impressive about this moment and the two-parter on the whole is that even though Robin is the protagonist of the story, we are told almost as much about Batman as we are about Robin. Batman barely says anything when Robin is dangling Zuko over the edge of the pier, but he doesn't need to because Robin himself makes it clear that Batman isn't cold or unfeeling, though he can be a bit of a jerk in all honesty, and because Batman has faith that Dick isn't driven by the same darkness that formed when Bruce's parents were murdered. When Dick lets Zuko go, Batman explains that he wasn't worried that Dick was going to take the case too personally and lose control. This ending makes complete sense because the audience has shown firsthand that Dick didn't have to go through such a tragic period alone, and even more important, that he had someone who understood what he was feeling. My only issue here is that Batman also says that he kept Dick away from Zuko because he was afraid that Zuko would kill him, which is a little difficult to buy because Zuko is a pretty average criminal. The episode tries to make this work by injuring Batman when he attempts to take Zuko down, but even that's flimsy because the super stealthy Batman made a noise and got caught. I get that Zuko is extremely paranoid and otherwise might not have heard Batman prowling around, but then Batman also conveniently, or I suppose inconveniently in this case, breaks his leg when he crashes through the ceiling after a pretty over-the-top moment in which Zuko blasts the ceiling into oblivion. On the topic of complaints, unless I'm missing something, the two-parter never explains why Zuko decides to come back to Gotham, especially when taking into account that he's scared to death of Batman. Of course, if Zuko didn't return, we wouldn't have a story, but this oversight could have been cleared up in a simple line or two of dialogue. Criticisms aside, Robin's Reckoning is yet another example of how skilled Batman the Animated Series was at executing its two-parters. Much like Feet of Clay, the animation varies noticeably between these two episodes, though the quality difference isn't quite as extreme. Part 1 looks absolutely spectacular, easily comparable with the quality of Heart of Ice. The black on Batman's costume and in the shadows are wonderfully rich and enhances the stylized ambience, especially in the aforementioned scene where Batman interrogates Stromwell. I can't explain it, but the abundance of shadow and sharp contrast of colors makes it seem like all the lights in Stromwell's house are off, save this one lamp, which allows Batman to eerily blend into the shadows. Just like that moment in Vendetta when Batman enters the police file room through the window, this scene has a perfect comic book money shot as Batman listens to Stromwell through an earpiece and is discovered by one of the patrolling thugs. Simply jaw-dropping. Even the subtle character nuances are so fluidly animated and are a big part of why the scene in the flashback where Bruce and Dick talk is so effective. Part 2 doesn't fare as well, and this is almost entirely because it doesn't have the same high contrast lighting. If anything, the color palette gets abysmally dull and nothing really pops out. Part 2 does have a few visually strong moments, like when Robin slides down the bridge on his motorcycle, and the close-up on Robin's face when he grabs Zuko. In terms of both episodes, I am a fan of the character designs used for the flashbacks. Young Dick looks very reminiscent of the way Bob Kane originally drew him from his first appearance, and there are subtle changes to the adult characters such as Gordon's brown hair from year 1, and even Batman's costume which sports the pocket belt sans yellow oval on his bat logo. It's interesting that he goes back to this earlier look in the New Adventure season, probably to reflect Batman's modern look in the comics, which also originates from year 1. The voice acting is outstanding as always, especially Joey Simmerin as young Dick Grayson, who delivers a very emotional performance for a child actor. Both his and Kevin Conroy's acting is the other component that makes their scene together so touching and personal. The other guest actor here is Thomas Wilson of Back to the Future fame as Tony Zuko. He's lent his voice to various other animated projects and video games such as SpongeBob as the voice of Flats, and Brave and the Bold as Catman and Sportsmaster. I'm particularly fond of his portrayal of Electro in Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. He's just so great at playing jerks, which is not to say he doesn't have good range too. Speaking of range, Lauren Lester demonstrates exactly that by playing the traditional jokey Robin early on, and later vocalizing a darker edge when he comes face to face with Zuko, which he will come to use more as Dick adopts the Nightwing persona. The delivery of "I've waited a long time for this, Zuko" is really intimidating and showcases just how much his performance fleshes out multiple facets of the same character. Really, that's the greatest compliment I can pay Robin's Reckoning as a whole. It thoughtfully fleshes out Dick Grayson, and in doing so, we get to learn more about what makes Batman tick and the nature of their partnership. The contrast in their nature serves to spark the tension that will separate them later on, but also defines how Batman and Robin learn from each other in the quest for justice. This episode earned Batman the Animated Series an Emmy for Most Outstanding Half-Hour or Less Program, and judging from its complexity of characterization and captivating animation, that's certainly no surprise. I wouldn't hesitate to give Part 1 a 5, but Part 2 is closer to a 4, so I average out Robin's Reckoning to a top-notch 4.5 out of 5. It can definitely be counted among Batman the Animated Series' finest moments. Looks like the finest moments keep on coming because next time we'll take a look at a seminal Joker episode, The Laughing Fish. As always, I feel the need to thank you guys for sticking around and watching these reviews. The Laughing Fish will definitely be my next video, but after that I like to review something Spider-Man related, so I get the chance to go in depth about another character that I love. Don't worry though, because I have no intention of stopping these analyses on Batman the Animated Series, and I even plan to tackle pieces that extend beyond the scope of this particular show, such as select episodes of Justice League and a re-review for Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. It'll take a while, but that means I shouldn't run out of videos anytime soon. Until next time, make sure you stock up on plenty of Robin stories to get to know the best sidekick in the history of comics. I recommend Batman, A Lonely Place of Dying, or if you're specifically a fan of Dick Grayson, I recommend Robin Year 1, Chuck Dixon's run on Nightwing, and Batman the Black Mirror. Long live the Boy Wonder!